There is a quiet shift that happens inside a man when he spends long periods of time alone, not isolation, not loneliness, but solitude, the kind that becomes a lifestyle rather than a temporary season. This is where Sigma males naturally thrive. They don't retreat because they feel unworthy of the world. They step back because solitude sharpens them. It clarifies their inner compass, molds their priorities, and strips away noise that most people never learn to live without. And the longer a Sigma male remains single, the more deeply this internal restructuring takes place. At first, nothing seems unusual. He simply enjoys his space, his routine, his quiet independence. But while most people rely on external relationships to define their identity, the Sigma male develops inward. His sense of self begins to stand on its own legs, unaffected by approval, unshaken by expectations, and untempted by the need to perform. As this growth continues, something subtle but profound emerges. Unpredictability, not chaos, not impulsiveness, but a form of psychological independence so refined that no one can easily anticipate what he will do next. People often misunderstand this quality. They think unpredictability means emotional inconsistency. For Sigma males, it is the opposite. It is the predictable commitment to follow their own inner truth rather than the patterns others expect from them. When you remove the social pressure that typically molds a man's choices, dating expectations, romantic obligations, emotional negotiations, what remains is a version of him that moves according to internal logic, not external influence. This is why the longer he stays single, the harder it is for others to read him. He becomes comfortable challenging norms. He becomes selective in what he engages with. He becomes impossible to manipulate. And he becomes increasingly guided by instinct rather than routine. This unpredictability doesn't make the Sigma male reckless. It makes him sovereign. A man who acts from within cannot be mapped from the outside. And in a world that depends on predictability to control behavior, a man who cannot be controlled becomes mysterious. In the following sections, we explore 6 reasons why Sigma males naturally grow more unpredictable the longer they remain single, not as a warning, but as an insight into the rare psychology of the self-directed man. Number 1, their priorities shift toward internal fulfillment. When a Sigma male spends long stretches of life in solitude, a subtle psychological restructuring takes place, one that is not rooted in rebellion, but in clarity. The longer he is alone, the less power external validation has over him. This isn't a dramatic withdrawal from society, nor is it a performance of independence. It is simply the natural consequence of having uninterrupted time to observe his own thoughts, values, and habits without interference. Solitude becomes a kind of laboratory where he studies himself with honesty. Over time, he discovers that peace brings more strength than adrenaline, that growth provides deeper satisfaction than attention, and the purpose offers longer-lasting fulfillment than any fleeting social reward. This is why his behavior begins to shift. He stops responding to the world according to its usual rhythms. Instead, he moves according to an inner compass that is refined, deeply personal, and often invisible to others. From a psychological standpoint, this inward shift aligns closely with principles of intrinsic motivation, a concept studied in self-determination theory. People typically operate from 2 types of motivation: extrinsic, which relies on reward, praise, or social approval, and intrinsic, which emerges from one's own sense of purpose, curiosity, or personal values. Sigma males, who spend extended periods alone, drift almost entirely toward intrinsic motivation. With no audience to impress, no social hierarchy to compete within, and no constant emotional noise from others, they learn to act for reasons that feel meaningful rather than socially convenient. This is what makes their decisions unpredictable. They do not choose based on what society expects. They choose based on what aligns with their internal structure. Something few people truly understand, because most individuals rarely spend enough time alone to build one. In everyday life, this can manifest in ways that seem confusing to others. He may walk away from situations that most men would chase, not because he is afraid, but because he understands the hidden cost to his peace. He might abandon opportunities that look impressive on paper because they do not align with his long-term direction. He might prefer a quiet night of reading or building a new skill over group activities because he feels more alive in self-development than in social stimulation. This shift is not arrogance, it is self-awareness. And self-aware individuals often appear mysterious because they are not driven by the same psychological triggers as everyone else. People tend to expect men to act according to external motivations, desire for status, approval, validation, or romantic attention. But Sigma males who have spent enough time alone begin acting from internal necessity. They move like men who are guided, not pulled. And whenever a man stops being predictable to the world, it's usually because he has finally become predictable to himself. Number 2, emotional independence becomes their default. Most men become emotionally predictable in relationships because their emotional rhythm gradually syncs with another person's expectations. Over time, they learn what to say to keep the peace, how to act to avoid conflict, and what emotions are considered acceptable within the relationship's unwritten rules. But a Sigma male outside of that structure evolves differently. Without the emotional obligations that often shape most people's behavior, he becomes entirely self-contained. His inner world becomes his primary influence, not the emotional climate of a partner. This doesn't make him distant or cold. It simply means his emotions are no longer filtered through pressure, guilt, or a desire to maintain harmony. Instead, they arise from genuine internal clarity. Modern psychology often refers to this as internal regulation, a healthy ability to manage emotions without relying on external validation or feedback. Because he isn't constantly adjusting himself to meet someone else's emotional needs, his responses become calmer, more deliberate, and grounded in self-awareness. This is where unpredictability begins to show, not because he is erratic, but because he is unusually unaffected by the social cues most men respond to. When a man spends long periods in solitude, studies show his brain begins to prioritize introspection and deep focus. Neural pathways associated with independent decision-making become stronger, and stress responses often diminish due to the absence of interpersonal conflict. For the Sigma male, this creates a unique emotional environment. His choices aren't reactions, they're reflections. He doesn't rush to defend himself during arguments, doesn't feel the need to prove a point, and doesn't mirror someone else's emotional intensity. People around him might find this surprising or confusing because they expect a familiar emotional pattern: frustration when challenged, enthusiasm when praised, reassurance when distanced. Instead, he remains steady. His reactions become quietly unpredictable in the sense that they no longer follow the common social script. This emotional independence also gives him an unusual calmness. While most people feel compelled to respond immediately during tense moments, Sigma males are more likely to pause, think, and respond with clarity rather than impulse. That pause alone can feel like a plot twist to people who are used to emotional predictability. His solitude sharpens not just his emotional boundaries, but also his insight. He sees situations without the fog of emotional pressure, leading him to make decisions others might not expect. His unpredictability, then, is not chaos. It is the natural outcome of a man who is guided by inner truth rather than external demand. Number 3, they develop highly personalized routines. Long-term solitude allows Sigma males to develop a life rhythm that is entirely self-directed, shaped through quiet observation, intentional choices, and internal clarity rather than external influence. When a man spends extended periods living on his own terms, his daily habits stop being generic routines and slowly turn into deeply personal rituals. Over time, these rituals become an anchor, steady, familiar patterns that give him both structure and freedom. Psychologists often note that individuals who spend long stretches in solitude tend to develop strong intrinsic motivation. They do things because they find meaning in them, not because someone else expects them to. This is especially true for Sigma males. Without the subtle compromises that naturally come with romantic partnerships, shared schedules, negotiations, emotional balancing, his preferences evolve in directions that are uniquely aligned with his nature. He may eat at unusual hours, adopt uncommon hobbies, or design a workspace that makes sense only to him. And because solitude gives him the space to experiment, refine, and follow curiosity without interruption, his lifestyle often drifts far from social norms. But this unpredictability does not mean chaos or emotional instability. In fact, research on self-determination theory shows that people who operate from inner autonomy are often more grounded and less reactive than those who rely on external validation. Sigma males simply become unpredictable to others because they are no longer following the timelines and expectations that most people are conditioned to understand. While society often assumes that men should follow a certain relationship path or maintain a conventional routine, the Sigma moves according to an inner compass that is invisible to outsiders. He may take a sudden trip without explaining it, shift career direction without announcing it, or change living environments because he senses it is time for growth. To him, these choices feel natural, even necessary. To others, they seem mysterious. His lifestyle becomes harder to forecast because it isn't built on collective patterns or relational obligations. Instead, it is shaped by introspection, self-study, and a quiet adaptability that grows stronger the longer he is single. In essence, solitude doesn't make a Sigma male unpredictable in a reckless sense. It makes him independent in a way that defies standard templates. His life becomes a reflection of inner authenticity rather than societal expectation, and that authenticity naturally produces a rhythm that only he can fully understand. Number 4, their standards rise quietly but significantly. When a Sigma male spends long stretches of his life single, something subtle but powerful begins to take shape within him. It's not bitterness and it's not pride, it's clarity. With time alone, his mind becomes a quieter place, and he begins to see relationships with a kind of precision that most people never slow down enough to develop. Solitude sharpens his self-awareness, and through that sharpening, his standards naturally evolve. The longer he remains single, the more clearly he understands what he will and will not accept from the people he allows into his life. He becomes unapologetically honest with himself about what drains him, what anchors him, and what aligns with the kind of man he continues to grow into. This isn't ego, it's discernment rooted in emotional maturity. Psychological studies on attachment and self-concept show that individuals who spend intentional time alone often develop stronger internal boundaries and a firmer sense of identity. Sigma males experience this at a deeper level because solitude isn't a punishment for them, it's their natural environment. As this clarity grows, they stop tolerating superficial conversations that lack substance, emotional volatility that disrupts their peace, and low-effort interactions that come wrapped in excuses. And because these men do not broadcast their inner standards or explain their reasoning, outsiders often misinterpret their selectiveness as unpredictability. But unpredictability is simply how consistency looks when other people don't have access to your internal compass. A Sigma male is not unpredictable to himself. In fact, he becomes more predictable than ever, guided by principles instead of impulses. His decisions become quieter, cleaner, and more aligned with long-term thinking rather than temporary comfort. This shift is also reinforced by well-documented psychological patterns. People with high autonomy and self-regulation tend to prefer relationships that operate on mutual respect, reciprocity, and emotional steadiness. Anything less feels like noise intruding on a carefully built inner world. So when he walks away from someone quickly, or when he seems mysterious in who he chooses to entertain, it's not chaos, it's calibration. He's moving according to a refined understanding of what brings him peace and what disrupts it. The Sigma male simply stops trying to fit himself into spaces that don't feel authentic. To observers, this transition makes him seem hard to read. But in reality, he has never been more transparent to himself. Number 5, they follow logic and instinct, not social timelines. Because they are not influenced by relationship milestones or societal expectations, Sigma males operate on a completely different internal rhythm, one that rarely aligns with what society considers the right time for anything. While most people pace their lives around familiar checkpoints, settling down by a certain age, climbing a predictable career ladder, or shaping their choices around partnership, Sigma males move according to their own internal compass. This self-directed timeline isn't a rebellion. It's simply the natural outcome of their deep self-reliance and introspective nature. Psychologists often note that individuals who score high in autonomy and low in social conformity tend to navigate life with greater independence, making decisions based on personal logic rather than external validation. That's the Sigma male in motion, someone who doesn't feel pressure to meet expectations he never agreed to in the first place. This internal independence shows itself most clearly in the major turning points of his life. He can decide to move to a new city, not because a relationship is changing or because he's chasing a trend, but because he senses it's time for a new environment. He can leave a stable job and pursue a new path based solely on his own assessment of growth and alignment. Research in personality psychology shows that people with a strong internal locus of control, meaning they believe their life direction comes from within, tend to take bolder, more self-generated risks. Sigma males embody this trait deeply. They travel when they want to explore, not when a partner's schedule allows. They reinvent themselves without needing anyone's approval. And because there is no external timetable guiding them, their choices appear sudden, even shocking, to those who measure life through conventional milestones. This unpredictability doesn't come from chaos. It comes from clarity. Living outside the traditional timeline frees Sigma males from the subtle social pressures that guide most people's moves. They are not waiting to get married before they buy a house, nor are they waiting for the right age to switch careers. Instead, they evolve as they feel internally ready. This lifestyle naturally confuses others because it challenges the idea that life must follow a linear pattern to be meaningful. Their decisions may seem abrupt, but internally they are the result of long reflection, private evaluation, and honest self-assessment. And because they operate without external anchors, Sigma males often end up creating lives that feel more fluid, more adaptable, and more authentic. Their unpredictability is not instability. It is self-governed movement, a rhythm tuned to their own internal truth, rather than the world's expectations. Number 6, they become comfortable breaking norms. The longer a Sigma male remains single, the more naturally he begins to view life as an observer rather than a participant, trapped inside the social machinery. Solitude sharpens his psychological distance, allowing him to notice patterns, unspoken expectations, and cultural assumptions that most people accept without question. Over time, this detachment becomes a kind of internal education. He learns that many traditions are not absolute truths, but habits repeated across generations. He sees how social norms often reward conformity rather than individuality, and he becomes comfortable stepping outside of them. This shift isn't rebellious for its own sake. It comes from an analytical mind, quietly studying human behavior. Research in personality psychology even suggests that introverted independent men tend to develop stronger internal frameworks for decision-making, relying less on external validation and more on personal logic. Because of this, the Sigma male feels no pressure to meet society's timelines, expectations, or definitions of success. While others organize their lives around approval, belonging, or predictable routines, he builds a life that aligns with his values, his rhythm, and his sense of purpose. To structured thinkers, this independence appears unpredictable because he doesn't follow the usual script. But to those who understand self-governed men, his actions are deeply consistent. He simply refuses to compromise his autonomy, and that makes his choices steady, intentional, and rooted in clarity. His unpredictability is only a reflection of how predictable society expects men to be. In Solitude, he learns that the real strength of a man is not in meeting expectations, but in understanding himself well enough to write his own.